Welcome back to the Rise Above podcast. I'm your host, Will Lambley. Today, we're so excited to be joined by Brooklyn Biancamano, who ran track and now is making a big impact with FCA at the University of Arkansas. First off, Brooklyn, thanks for being on with us again since we tried recording a few days ago, but now it's going to work this time.
Yeah, it's okay. I'm so happy to be back here again.
Yeah, no, and as I mentioned, you came to Arkansas to run track, so I'm assuming if you came to Arkansas to run track, since Arkansas is a huge track school, that that track was a huge part of your life, and that obviously you wouldn't say this, but that you were really good at track growing up.
Yeah, so I've been playing sports my entire life. I would say that was my identity before coming to know the Lord. And so from the age of being able to walk, I was thrown in soccer, softball, I guess it was t-ball at the time. And I really didn't know track was a thing until I was at a soccer agility camp when I was, how old was I? I guess I was in 6th grade, so around 11 or 12. And I had a speed agility coach approach my parents and ask if I ran track because I was absolutely loving all the running obstacles. And my parents were like, no. And so they introduced us to a running program on the coast that no longer exists. I was a part of it the last year that it was around. And I was like, running's a sport. People do that for fun. The saying that running's every sport's punishment. It really is a love-hate relationship.
In any sport, when you hear running, you just think, this can be bad. Yes,
suicide, something not fun. But I started in 6th grade and just, started training for a mile, just fun run. And then come 7th grade, we talked to the high school coach, and he was not interested at all to start with. I still remember my mom's phone call with him, and he's just like, you have a 7th grader, because I was coming from out of district and I missed tryouts, and he was like, not really into it until he goes, what's her mile time? And I'm pretty sure at that time I was going into 7th grade, and I ran a 5:32.
Wow,
maybe.
That's insane.
Yeah, and he was like, "Oh, we have practice at 6 a.m. At the beach on Monday. Please be there." And I was just like, how his demeanor completely changed, which was a blessing that I had got to run prior to joining the team, just in a little fun elementary run. But and so then on, I started with varsity, and eventually ended up deciding between track and soccer at the end of 7th grade because we have cross country in the fall, and then indoor track is sort of January through March, and then outdoor track finishes out the year. And so having soccer and indoor track going on at the same time, you just have to pick commitments because it gets to be a lot.
Yeah, exactly. And pretty much like you were saying, the track you're doing long distance pretty much year round with cross country and then track in the spring.
Lots of miles.
Yeah, I know, I'm sure. And then during that time, was faith a big part of your life too?
Yeah, so I grew up in the Catholic Church, but because sports were such a large part of my life, I'm one of 4, I'm the oldest. And so not only were my parents toting me around, but all of my siblings to lots of different sporting events. And so our weekends were consumed by that. And it was if we just have a weekend where we're not traveling, because we played travel softball, travel soccer. And then my running events started, we would travel to get me to better races. And so it just became church was a, if we can, not a, we are going to make it a priority. And so my family sort of fell out of going to the church. I always say we sort of became creasters, Christmas and Easter goers, which we went just a bit more than that until actually I honestly a few years ago couldn't remember the last time that my family had been to church together. And so then from about the age 12 to 16, church was really inconsistent in my life. And I had a really, I guess I never had understood to have a relationship with Jesus. I had heard the gospel. I knew Jesus died for my sins. And I was just okay, and now I'm supposed to try to be a good person. And so I had a really interesting perfectionism conflict in my head. And I think part of that comes from being an oldest child and having a lot of expectations not only put on me by other people, but I put a lot of high expectations on myself for things that just really aren't attainable. Because if we were able to be perfect, we wouldn't need a savior. And so that's something I didn't fully comprehend. And then when I turned 16, I was like, wait, I can drive now. So does that create a responsibility for me to take myself to church now? And it wasn't coming from a place of, oh, I need to take myself to church so I can, worship and, glorify God and be with community. It was because when you're in the South, you spend the night at somebody's house on a Saturday and you're going to church with them on Sunday.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
It's just expected. And so I was coming from didn't realize it then, but it was a perspective of like, hey, I want to look a certain way. Like, this is just what's expected in the culture that I grew up in. And this is what you look like, you're a good person doing this. And so I started going to a Baptist church right down the street from me because a few friends of mine went there. And we had a lot of just people in the community we knew. And for the first time, it was emphasized to me that I can have a relationship with Jesus, and everything from that point on changed, and I surrendered my life to the Lord. And so not only did things in my life look different, but things in sports look different for me too.
Yeah, that's something I was going to ask about too. Did that kind of like change how you approach running track too?
Yeah, so it was a slow start at first because, I mean, when you go from death to life and there's transformation and salvation, I think a lot of people are like, oh, okay, everything's going to change immediately. And it's like,
exactly.
No. Your heart posture changes, but there are still so many things that
there's
we are
still
like,
challenges.
Absolutely. And I mean, I've been walking with the Lord now. I'm about to be 21, so almost 5 years now. And I still have so many challenges. God is constantly teaching me something new. But I would say the first thing God started shaping my heart on is like, hey, I need to be with community. I get to go to church. It's not a have to go to church. There's nothing we can do to earn salvation. There's nothing we can do to be worthy of that, but we get to go to church, we get to glorify God. And so getting to go to church is something that as a believer, like, we should do, even though church attendance doesn't save you. And so I was just like, okay, wait, I'm going to make this a priority. So then I started like basically telling my parents like, hey, like, I don't want to go to meets that I can't be to church on Sunday. And then if I really had to miss, I would try to watch it online. And I started going to small groups and I got involved with the youth. And that's really when I saw, because when you can't walk alone in salvation. You have to walk with people. And that's something that really started even impacting my team, because I was able to start, bringing some of my friends and some of my teammates to youth with me on Wednesday night. And so not only did I have a community at my church, but we started fostering a community on my team. And so that was great.
That's awesome. Just to be able to bring those people along too, and just show them that, sure, man, I love this sport, but the thing that drives me is that relationship with Christ. Mm-hmm. And that's awesome for like other people to see it too. Like whenever you became a Christian, like, and I'm sure things started changing, even how you ran and how you went about your normal life.
Yeah, I feel like the biggest changes started happening about a year into my faith. Because, like, someone once told me there's no JV Christianity. Because I used to think, like, oh, I'm going to get to this point in my walk with the Lord where I'm, like, a super mature Christian. I've got it all figured out. But, like, no, we are all constantly, like, figuring it out, still stumbling at times. And so that when I understood that, I was like, okay, I need to stop trying to like reach this like peak Christianity and just focus on what the Lord's teaching me right now. And so there were just so many things through that time that the Lord was really shaping me and teaching me, and just based off a conviction in your own heart. Like, God's not going to teach everyone the same thing in the same way or at the same time. And so like I could go into that, but that's a whole list of things.
Exactly.
But what really, I think the first time that I really, after my salvation, was like really putting my trust in the Lord and trying to be like, okay, God, it's not what I want. It's not about me, but it's about your will and what you want, was deciding where I was going to go to school at. And so that whole process was a huge just moment of trusting in the Lord, as I approached like official visits, and trying to be like, okay, God, like there are lots of places where I want to go, and that would seem really awesome, but I want you to put me and give me peace where you want me to be. And so I really wanted to stay in the SEC, and so that was super nice. And there were some schools that were closer to home that I was looking at, but the day I got to Arkansas, and I'd been praying, and this is when prayer also started becoming a really important piece in my life, because I did not understand just how powerful prayer is and just trusting in the Lord. And so as I was just praying, I was like, God, please give me peace in this decision. Don't let this be just a selfish decision. Don't let me just look at myself for this. And when I came to Arkansas, I remember I got to go on the track on a Friday. We had just drove 10 hours up here, and the team wasn't even back from meet yet. And I'm just standing there on the track. It's probably like 7 p.m. The sun's going down, and one of the coaches and my parents are inside the building talking, and it was just almost like I just was so blessed, and I got this moment of just me and God. and standing on the track, and I was like, okay, I'm going to Arkansas. And I just knew in that moment. And it's like so strange because it's like, how'd you know? And I'm like, I just did. And so I told my mom when we got back to the hotel, I was like, hey, Mom, Dad, I'm going to Arkansas. And they were like, we haven't even met the coach yet. Like, chill. So just like some peace from the Lord, like that was a huge step forward in my faith.
And that's what's so awesome about having a relationship with Christ too. Like in those moments, you know that like whenever you feel like calling to go somewhere, that like obviously you don't hear the audible voice of God, but that is God like speaking to you, telling you, man, this is where you need to go.
Yeah, and I haven't had second guesses since.
Yeah,
and that's
awesome. Yeah.
Like when God brings you clarity, like it doesn't matter what the world brings in. Is like, oh hey, like let me let you have doubts, and this looks like no, God brought me clarity, so I can like rest in that and have peace and move forward in that. So yeah, my parents were a little like, wait, why are you picking the one that's furthest away from home? But they encouraged me in that decision, and after the visit, it just brought like more and more clarity. So
yeah, no, that's awesome. That kind of reminds me of one of the first times I met you. There's a verse you shared with me in Matthew 6:33. I forgot. Do you remember what it said exactly?
Yeah, seek first the kingdom and his righteousness, and all things will be added unto you.
Yeah, no, I think that verse is awesome because like you didn't know everything that was to come in your future Arkansas, but you knew God was calling you to Arkansas, and as you've learned when seeking Him, like He'll show you a way even when it's not exactly what we plan in life.
Yeah.
And what are some what was it like kind of when you got to Arkansas? Was there like some challenges, things you had to go through?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, whether you're a student athlete or just a student, and you're going to face trials when you get to college. I feel like there was no one I could talk to that would prepare me just for all the things you would face.
I think that's so true. There's no one you can talk to.
It's like, hey, if you're a freshman listening to this, just like, you're going to make it through. You're going to be all right. Because I had cousins and just friends that would be like, it's the best time of your life. Like, college is amazing. First semester, freshman year, I was like, y'all are liars.
That's exactly what I thought too. Yeah.
I was like, this is awful. And not only are you coming to a new place, you're living with strangers, you're taking harder classes, and just your schedule is all over the place. You're trying to find an area to plug in and find people and community and a family and just so many things. And then on top of that, as a student athlete, you have all these expectations you feel like that are being just pressed upon you from like a coach. You're at a D1 school. You've got all these standards and this legacy to live up to. And I was so excited for it, but at the same time, I felt the weight of it all felt so heavy. And I just remember so many nights freshman year just crying myself to sleep because I was like, I don't know how I'm going to do this. And it was that mindset that was toxic because I can't do it. God can do it. Like, God put me here, and so I need to be turning to Him in these moments. And so as I started to like look towards Him, I was able to just have a lot more peace about it. It doesn't mean that necessarily those hard things went away and that they weren't hard anymore, but knowing that I wasn't in control of it and that everything happens for a reason and that God's hands were over it. And that even like happened through not only were classes hard and you were trying to figure out the dynamic of the team and like where to be and where you were allowed to be is like a huge thing, like especially the facilities. I remember walking into rooms and I was just like, am I allowed to be in here? Like, am I supposed to be in here? I have no idea. But then I also faced a lot of injury, and that was something that was also just so far out of my expectations. I think everything else I was like, oh, okay, like I just didn't know about this. But it's common and I have to figure out how to deal with it. Like everybody has to deal with it, and injury is just a part of being an athlete, but how constant my injuries became is something that I was not prepared for. So yeah, I'd probably say that that's probably the hardest thing.
Yeah, and I'm sure up to that point, had you had any injuries in your past?
Yeah, so all through high school, freshman year, I had knee problems, and then I've had shin problems, but they were all injuries that they would come and then they would go away. Okay. I would take a few weeks to heal, and we'd be good. So this was the first time that like I had an injury and it just was not healing, or I had stress fractures, and so I would get a stress fracture and we would be like, okay, all right, we got to take a few months off because stress fractures, they take a long time to heal because you have to wait for all the inflammation to go down because there's not an actual fracture line, but there's a lot of stress in the bone, and so you have to back off, and you're trying to cross train during this time. So I became a really good swimmer and a really good biker because that's all I could do, and so then you'd come back and you'd have to modify training and try to like come back really slow because there's no there's not a true time frame because everyone's body is different. And so the doctors are just going based off of how you're feeling. And so I feel really good. And I'm like, all right. And so they get you back on the anti-gravity treadmill and you're going back really slow. And before you know it, you're back on the ground. And, what I see happen a lot is you get back on the ground and we're good to go. All right.
Yeah.
Like it just, you take some time and you build back up slowly. But what was happening for me, and just, what did the cycle happen like 4 times, is I would get about 4 weeks on the ground and finally get back to the point where I was, finally getting to do some harder practices, and I would start getting pain again. And it was just like a why, God? Like why? Like what's going on moment? And I would just be like, okay, like this is a phantom pain. Like, oh, like this isn't a stress fracture again. Like I just we got to like push through it. But it comes between a balance with, as an athlete, being like, okay, like, is this a pain I can push through, or is this something I need to talk to somebody about? And thankfully we have such an amazing medical team just here at the U of A, and so being able to talk with them and them, taking things seriously and being able to be proactive about things. And so, we would go see the doctors again, and it just each time was like, oh, your stress fracture's back. And it was like not the news I was preparing to hear. But what was amazing is how God was moving through all of that. And so like, that's probably the biggest thing I would want to focus on, is like, hey, we can focus on these injuries and we can focus on the expectations that I had to let go of. But like, what was God doing in the midst of all of this? And what he was doing, I still don't have the full picture. We never will. He has full understanding. We don't. That just is where trust and faith comes in, because if we knew the whole plan, you wouldn't have to have faith. But the big thing is I've got to watch God just slowly prepare my heart to move into a new season. And so with that was stripping my identity away from sports. And that's something that I didn't realize that my identity was so caught up in, because the question that kept running through my head too is like, what am I going to do if I can't run anymore? Like, who am I without running? And it's like, hold on, you're a daughter of the King. Like, whose are you is the question you should be asking. And so as he started to shape that, and I started to actually ponder the idea of like, okay, wait, like running doesn't have to define my life. And I was able to, pour some more time into community and make some more commitments within the church, just as far as serving, since I wasn't so caught up in the busyness of sports, during recovery. Training didn't look the same as it always had been. It wasn't so demanding on my life anymore. And I was just able to rest in the Lord as well, and rest my body. I mean, I have been doing this for the past decade. And so like where the Lord's brought me now, I just have so much peace that he was moving in it the whole time, despite my own expectations.
Yeah, and I think that's an awesome testament too, because I feel like everyone in life, maybe a lot of people are facing this right now, finds themselves in a questioning of asking God, why is this happening?
Yeah.
This makes no sense. And I think it's totally fine to ask that, because like some things just like are just so confusing. Like I kept thinking, when you started dealing with injuries in college, you're probably thinking back to high school of how, okay, it's just going to get better. And but what I love about during that time, you figure out like, man, God, what do you want from me in this time? Like, what is it you're teaching me? And I love how you talked about how you started just being around in that church community. I'm sure that just played a huge part in just the joy and hope you have today.
Yeah, it really did. And I mean, even looking back, we started this conversation with, how did I get started in the sport? And how did I, get started with my faith? Like, where was that turning point moment? And everything that God has walked me through, I think, has led up to this point. There's the saying that God doesn't give you more than you can handle. And I think it's because he has equipped you and prepared you in the seasons prior to that. And so I got to watch how like community was so pressed upon me and so important to me in high school. And so getting here to Arkansas, I was like, okay, the first thing I need to do is get plugged into community. And little did I know was that community is what was going to really uphold me during this struggle that I didn't even know I was going to walk through. I didn't know I was going to walk through this trial. I didn't know how long this trial was going to be. And so having such a strong support system behind me, having people that were like constantly referring me back, like, hey, I know this is hard, but you've got to keep pressing into the Lord. And like, so that helped me from drifting. I think the way that I would have drifted in the past. So having a support system, I think, is so important, because we can't do this walk alone.
No, it's I don't want to say it's impossible, but it's going to feel really
like it's really already hard enough.
Yeah.
And I think that's a misconception a lot of people have too. Like, it's like, oh, like, when you become a Christian, things just get easy. No, they get harder.
Yeah. But I think, yeah, as you said, they get harder. I think that's what's awesome about the Bible, though. In the Bible, it literally says, like, it will be hard. It's like verse like John 16:33 says, in this life you will face trials, but take heart, for God's overcome this world. And I think that's just what's so awesome about the Bible. Then surround yourself with because those friends in your life. Community is almost like the wind you need to keep going.
Absolutely. And like just to see the people that have stuck by me through that, and like also like just the encouragement that I've received from people that, you know, I've talked to some people that have walked through similar things, and it's like, wow, like I never would have, you know, probably talked to them about this or known them in that capacity. And just to be able to be vulnerable with people too in that, and like be like, okay, like I don't have this all on my own. And it's okay to like ask for help sometimes, like, because like I said, we're not perfect and we can't bear it all on our own shoulders. And so learning also how to surrender, going back to expectations, learning how to surrender those expectations to the Lord, because I think we all have this plan for our life. You know, it's like, oh, hey, like this is what I want to do. This would be really awesome. But God's plan is better. And I think sometimes we're not prepared for that plan to look different, and sometimes drastically different than what we had planned. And this is what I've always like just said within the past, probably the past year, because I felt the Lord just bringing me into a new season. I didn't know when, I didn't know how, because I thought the Lord had brought me here to Arkansas for running, you know, to be a Razorback, to run for the U of A. But what I'm realizing now is that the Lord used running to bring me here. And so just allowing the different seasons and the different places and the different experiences and the different connections that God places in your life, being like, hey, like I can have this expectation of how God's going to use this, but I also need to have an open heart and an open mind to the fact that like he might have a completely different plan for it, and that that's okay.
Yep. Yeah, no, I love what you said there about he might have a completely different plan, because although you came here to run track, you're not able to run track anymore. But what I love about your story is although you're not necessarily running track anymore, you're still able to make impact on those athletes, whether it's track or you said you're helping with soccer and other sports through FCAs. You've started working for them. Yeah. And I think that's an awesome platform, because as you learn when you accepted Christ in your life, man, it just changes everything you do, and it can give you hope. Because as I was in Stillwater this weekend at an Arkansas-Oklahoma State football game, like Arkansas ended up losing the game, and like if you're on a team and if your hope's not in Christ, you're going to get like extreme. Obviously, you should be mad if you lose a game, but like if your hope's not in Christ, then through the highs and lows of a season, like it can just mess with you mentally so much.
Oh yeah.
And like when your hope's in Christ, you can still. You're still going to struggle immensely, but just having something you can go to, and then like you said, the people you can go to, that's just huge.
Yeah, if your hope's not in Christ, I mean, I would think about the amount of times a race would affect my whole attitude, my whole demeanor for weeks following that race, depending on like, did I successfully get the time I was going for, the placement that I was trying to get? And if I did, I'd be on such a high, and I was like, oh yeah, like this is great, like I feel great, I'm ready to train. But then if I wouldn't and I would fail, I would absolutely like see myself in a manner of like, I can't do this, like I'm a failure, and I would define myself by that. And that's not what we're meant to do. As followers of Christ, we are called to define ourselves in Jesus and what God says in his word about us, and that's never changing. It doesn't matter if you're on the high or the low. That definition of who you are as a child of God does not change at all. And so having that, I feel like provides so much more stability in your life, and you can go through the highs and lows. And I think, what did someone once say to me? How did it go? It goes, you haven't failed until you stop trying. Because I used to think like, oh my gosh, I messed up. It's over. I've failed. Like, I'm like, this is awful. But it's like, wait, no, like you're not going to be perfect. So you have to get up and keep trying again. Things aren't going to always go your way. But you can take something out of those lows. Because how many times have you been in a valley and God has used that to prepare you for the next high, or get you to that next high, teach you something that you didn't even know you were going to be learning. And sometimes most of the time in the lows, you don't see what God's teaching you. Yeah. It's not until you're out of it, but just keeping your eyes fixed on him and just knowing like, okay, he is going to deliver me from this. Like I'm not going to stay in this, but he has a purpose in it. And so when he brings you out of it, and just you get to see those lessons and you get to continue to grow in that. The amount of times that I look back and I'm like, wow, God, like you are so good. Even when I don't understand, and even when I just don't see a way out, like he is preparing the next door. He's preparing the next way. And so just to know that like he's always in the midst of it and that it's always going to be good. You just have to trust his plan, his timing. Because that's another thing. How impatient do we get in those seasons of waiting? Because sometimes that low might just be just a waiting season. It doesn't necessarily have to be a traumatic season of failure. It can just be like, hey, I don't feel like anything's moving right now. And so, so I feel like as an athlete and just in my walk with the Lord, like I've watched those highs and lows, how they can define you. But you got to look to Christ.
Yeah. I love what you talked about too with the waiting. Like you just never know, like in that time of waiting, when we go to Christ, what he could be like equipping us for, getting us ready for. And kind of going off that, would that be something that you really try to encourage the athletes you come across with at FCA? Whatever the sport is.
Yeah, I would just say like I know for me right now, I feel like such a season of hurry in my life and trying to slow down and just be like, okay, like God, you've got me in this season. You've got me in this moment for a reason. Help me to just be focused and just content in where you have me. So, and whether that's in a waiting, like waiting for God to put you into the next thing, but being content in that waiting, like not waiting impatiently. There's a difference, waiting impatiently and waiting contently. So when you're waiting contently, you are making the most of the moment that you're in. You're letting the Lord move in it. You're stewarding things well. But when you're waiting impatiently, you're rushing through it. You're going to miss things. You're going to miss God in those moments. And so I would just say, like, whether you're in a season of you're not getting to travel right now, or you're in a season of injury, or, you're in a season of waiting for your season to start, because I know not all sports are in the fall. And so you're like, building up for competition. And whatever it is in your life, just know that God is preparing you. Like, use your time in the waiting, use your time in that season, in the moment well, is probably like the biggest thing that I can encourage others to do.
Yeah, no, I love what you said about waiting, and like making that time waiting like useful. And it reminded me exactly of Paul in Philippians 4 when he's in prison, just a terrible situation. But then he talks about he's going to be content, and when you're reading that, or for me listening to it, you might think like content, like what? He's in a terrible situation, but he's to be able to be content because he knows his hope is in Christ, and that's who he's going to.
So
and
good.
He's writing that letter to impact now millions of people through him being content. And then later he says, I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me. And I love like just the context behind that verse too, because like he's not saying that, oh, I just won a championship, I can do all things, but he's saying that when he's in prison in a terrible situation. So that's something that I love, and kind of goes back to what you said about just using that time of waiting and not just being impatient. And kind of after your time is done, whether it's at Arkansas or wherever you go, if there's something that people can know you for, what would you want that to be?
Yeah, honestly, I just want to be known as a light for Jesus. I mean, I think the biggest compliment, it's not to me, but what God does through me, is when I get to meet somebody and then they come back and they're like, I mean, I don't know if you've ever had these talks with friends. Recently, a lot of my friends and I've been having this like, oh, hey, like when I first met you, this is what I thought. It's like, oh, I did not think we'd ever be friends. And it's like, wait, now we hang out all the time. So just super crazy how, things happen in college. You meet somebody and 2 months later, y'all are best friends. But the most conversations that I have is like, hey, like when I met you, like I saw Jesus. And like that to me is the biggest compliment. It's the best thing you could be known for. And it's like not a prideful thing, because it's not anything that I'm doing. It's knowing that God's working through me, and just what a blessing that is. So
that's so awesome. And I'm sure that just like fires you up to like, be like, man, I just want to get back in the word again. And it reminds me of Ephesians 3:20, where it says Christ can do immeasurably more in us than we could ever think or imagine. And that's so awesome. Just your friends saying that, because I'm sure that encourages you too.
Absolutely, because it's like I'm like, wow, I wouldn't have really known that or really thought to like be like, oh yeah, like I'm exuding the Lord. I hope I am, but when somebody else is seeing it, it's such an encouragement to be like, oh okay, like I'm really am pursuing the Lord right now. Like I'm, not necessarily doing something right. I don't know if that's the right way to word it, but it's like, okay, like I am chasing after the Lord, and that's obvious. So it makes me be like, I need to go meet more people right now.
I'm sure that should encourage you. It's something, Coach Morris, who's one of my mentors, coach at Texas State, something he always like tells his teams is, in life, you can be a giver or a taker. And anytime I hear that, I always think like, the best example of being a giver, obviously, is Christ, because he gave his life for us.
Absolutely.
And that's just awesome what you said about and something that we can all take up of, man, one of the best things that anyone can ever say about us is when they saw us, they're able to see Jesus working through us. Because I think that's just such an encouragement for anyone that that we come across.
Yeah, because isn't that what we're called to
Yeah,
as believers? Yeah. We are called to be an example to the way that Christ lived his life. And we're not going to reach that perfectly, but if we're just striving for it every day, and if someone can just see a small glimpse of Jesus, because you never know when somebody is watching you,
Yep.
whether you're, thanking the person who just made your coffee, or somebody drops something and you pick it up for them, there's just an opportunity to show Jesus.
And it's radiant.
Every moment.
It's just so
Absolutely.
radiant.
Because we were talking about before the podcast, how our lives are a ministry. It doesn't necessarily matter where you are, whether that's you're in a classroom, you're at work, you're actually working within a church. You have so many opportunities every moment, every day, wherever you are, to be an example for Christ.
No, that's so good. And for people listening to this today, they've been able to hear about how you've been able to, find hope and find bigger hope than we can find anywhere in this world by choosing Christ, and the importance of the community, because as we both agreed on that, man, without community, life is so hard. Well, life is hard anyways, but it's a lot harder without that community. But obviously there's going to be someone listening to this today that either is going through something hard or will go through something hard that might just need a message of something that has helped you just get through a hard season in your life. What would be something that you would encourage them with?
Yeah, I would just say this. I don't know if anyone's heard this before, but it's stuck with me, and it's just the saying, let go and let God. Because how often are there things that, like, in our life, just as humans, we want control. We want to be able to, know what's next. We want to be able to, take hold of things and make them how we want them, or, steward them. And it's like, sometimes if you're holding on so tight to something, God can't move in that. You have to let it go and trust in him. And not only is that just an obedience to the Lord, but it's obedience in faith. Like, it's like, trusting that you don't know what's going to happen, but you know who God is. And so I think just looking to that character is like, we don't know what's going to happen this life, but just all throughout the Bible is like, we can just have trust and faith, and like, we know God's character because he does not change. He has been the same yesterday, today, and tomorrow. And so just being able to have hope in that.
No, that's awesome. And I couldn't have said it better. That's something that can be hard to do, but I challenge you as you go throughout this week. You said let go and let God.
Yeah.
Yep. Let go and let God. And I promise it doesn't mean I'm not going to say your situation's going to change. But what it will do is it'll give you some more hope, knowing that you don't have to do everything, know everything, be who you think you need to be, but just let God guide you in your life. As it says in Proverbs 3:5-6, when you trust in the Lord with all your heart, lean on your own understandings, acknowledge him in all your ways, he will make your path straight. And what I love about that verse and what Brooklyn just said is, it's not what necessarily we have to do, but it's about how we can trust in God and what he can do.
Amen,
because there's no mountain that he can't move. And can't thank you enough, Brooklyn, for being on with us today.
Thank you. I enjoyed it. It's great.
Yep. But thank you for everyone that tuned in today. We will catch you guys next week, or hopefully.